Hey YouTubers, it's Charlie. This is going to be my X-Men Apocalypse Easter eggs. Careful for spoilers if you haven't seen the movie yet. I'll also be talking about the post-credits scene too. At least we can all agree that the third one is always the worst. So let's just start with the really big one first. The Return of the Jedi Easter egg. So they come out of the movie theater in the mall. You've never been to a mall? Oh, that's it. We're going to the mall. So Jubilee comes out and says, Empire is so much better, which has been one of the biggest nerd debates of all time, what the best Star Wars movie is. But then Cyclops says the second one's always the best before Jean Grey's like, yeah, the third one, at least we can all agree, the third one's always the worst. This is both Bryan Singer patting himself on the back for X2 as well as Days of Future Past, which I think are the two best X-Men films of all time, not including the spin-offs like Deadpool. But by saying the third one is always the worst, they're making fun of X3, one of the worst X-Men films of all time, but they're also taking the piss out of themselves a little, like Bryan Singer saying X-Men Apocalypse is also one of the worst X-Men films of all time. So just a really awesome, well-written meta joke. Total slam dunk. But let's talk about the post-credit sequence. If you're not familiar with the Essex Corp, that is Nathaniel Essex, Mr. Sinister, meaning that he's probably going to be the main villain of the next film. But that's not even the biggest thing. So everybody knows Hugh Jackman has said that he's only doing the last Wolverine movie and then that'll pretty much be it for him. He's not going to be the character anymore. As a result, you probably won't be surprised to hear that Bryan Singer has already pitched X-23 to Fox executives, and it sounds like they're totally on board with it, because they take his blood sample, his Weapon X blood sample, and it sounds like they're going to clone him, and that's why the next movie is going to be in the 90s, so we'll get to see a version of X-23, who is a female clone of Wolverine. She takes over for Wolverine in the comics after he ends up dying. It's a whole big comic book story that has nothing to do with what's going on in the movies, but she ends up taking the mantle of Wolverine, so it sounds like they're going to try and do that in the movies too, which I think it'll be a lot of fun. Hopefully they'll get someone that's totally badass, but they haven't talked about casting. They haven't even said how she's going to be involved in the next couple of movies, but we can talk more about her later. A lot of you had questions about the timeline changes. How did Stryker get Wolverine into Weapon X if Mystique saved him at the end of Days of Future Past? So you may have detected some continuity problems in the movie. That's essentially them just kind of waving their hand. They did that on purpose. They're ignoring their own continuity just a little bit because they wanted that really awesome Wolverine moment. They wanted to show him after Weapon X, so they just said, screw the timeline, we're going to put Wolverine in there. We're going to do Weapon X. Let's do it. And Wolverine is wearing his helmet from Weapon X. So Wolverine himself, like the way he comes out, the way he looks, is a big Easter egg for his original comic book look. And you may have noticed that with some of the costumes, especially at the end, where Mystique and the rest of the X-Men are all wearing their traditional colors. It's like updated versions that look very much like the comic book costumes. They even give Cyclops the visor, and they have the Danger Room now, which is a nice Easter egg for the comics. And speaking of Mr. Sinister, he actually became who he is because of Apocalypse. Obviously, they're going to have to retcon some of that for the movies because the movie is saying that Apocalypse got buried for all this time, so he hasn't been around. But the other really cool thing about him is that he is responsible for the birth of Cable. Mr. Sinister is obsessed with bloodlines and genetic tampering. I'm not really expecting the movies to address that. There might be some Easter eggs in the next Deadpool movie because Cable is going to be in the Deadpool sequel. You may have spotted Stan Lee's cameo during the big Doctor Strangelove sequence. I felt like the bunker was very Doctor Strangelove looking, but Stan Lee naturally looking up as the world's about to end with his wife, who is his real-life wife. That's actually his real-life wife in the movie. We get a bald Professor X by the end of the movie. We get our tease for the Phoenix Force. Not yet Dark Phoenix yet. It doesn't become Dark Phoenix until the Phoenix fully takes over Jean Grey. So there's Phoenix, and then there's Dark Phoenix. But I think we're all in agreement that they're definitely pushing into a Dark Phoenix saga movie eventually, whether they turn that into a couple movies, or whether they try to do it as a single movie. Hopefully they try to tease that out a little bit. You don't go straight from Jean Grey learning about her powers in school as a young girl to Dark Phoenix. She doesn't become Dark Phoenix till much later in her life. Moira McTaggart comes back, no longer married, but she does have a son. On the animated series, she had a son named Proteus that was one of the villains. The Blob is back. We haven't seen him since Wolverine Origins. Beast builds the X-Jet and the underground basketball court hangar that they mentioned during X2. And on top of that, there's more X2 callbacks. I mean, it's a Bryan Singer film, so of course he's going to include a lot of references to his previous X-Men films. But there's a Professor X line of dialogue that James McAvoy borrows directly from Patrick Stewart's version of the character, where he says, "I feel a great swell of pity for the poor soul that comes to this school looking for trouble." That's a line directly from X2. Visually, there are a lot of Easter eggs for the movies. We have Mohawk Storm from the 80s, which is just an amazing look for her. Nightcrawler is wearing Michael Jackson's Thriller jacket through most of the movie. There are a couple deep-cut Morlock characters like Caliban. We haven't seen the Morlocks in a long time. They were a big part of the animated series. They changed Apocalypse's powers a little bit for the movie, but they give us growing Apocalypse when they're fighting inside the Mind Palace. A lot of people are wondering if Magneto's daughter that winds up dying in the movie is a version of Scarlet Witch. You could think of her that way, but it's so confusing as to the arrangement with Marvel. I think they have to tiptoe around their relationship in the comics. But it does sound like they're pushing forward with Quicksilver father-son relationship. When Apocalypse goes to recruit Angel, turn him into Archangel, his Archangel of Death, Metallica's Four Horsemen is playing on the PA system. When he's learning about the world by watching TV, one of the programs is old school Star Trek in an episode that's actually called Who Mourns for Adonai, and it's this story about how they encounter this supreme being calling himself Apollo that's a lot like Apocalypse. So yeah, Apocalypse already felt like a god to begin with, but I think he sees this and just chuckles to himself a little bit. He does have a sense of humor, but it doesn't really come across that much in the movie. The only real spin-off Easter egg that I could detect was X-23 X-Force because she's a big X-Force character. Mr. Sinister is an X-Men proper character. He appeared in Uncanny X-Men for the first time. But there's a lot of villain crossover when you get to these other titles like X-Force, Deadpool, New Mutants, so they'll probably be sharing a lot of characters eventually. And Bryan Singer did say there's a lot of deleted scenes, so there'll be more Easter eggs when they release those, but one of the biggest ones is that Taylor Swift is Dazzler. So when they're at the mall, there was this deleted scene where they're flipping through records, and Jean Grey pulls one out, and it's Dazzler, but it's Taylor Swift as Dazzler on this album. And on top of that, more mall stuff, Jubilee actually uses her powers in this mall sequence, but Bryan Singer confirmed that it got left on the cutting room floor. But if you guys spotted any other big Easter eggs that I didn't mention in the video, just write them below in the comments. So what I'm probably going to do in a couple days is do another X-Men video for the next sequel. I'll talk about Dark Phoenix, I'll talk about Mr. Sinister stuff, I'll talk about X-Force a little bit, especially X-23, really excited about that. So be sure to subscribe to get that. I'm also working on a Preacher video, there's new Game of Thrones this weekend, and I'll start doing some more Marvel videos now that a lot of DC TV has gone away. So while you guys wait for that next video to post, you can click here for my X-Men Apocalypse review, and you can click here for my Captain America #1 WTF reaction. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Let's high five. I'll see you guys tonight. Hail Hydra.